So sprawl is a spreading kind of landform. It tends to consume a lot of land and it spreads into adjacent land. And this is fuzzy, but I still like this political cartoon. You see the top scenario of a home and it looks like a rural area and people in the car are singing over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. And that was in years gone by. And now over the speed bumps and past the mall to grandmother's house we go. Here's the same house. This territory has been urbanized, and that's why it's called urban sprawl. I'm calling it suburban sprawl, but you could call it urban sprawl because the area that's now suburbanized is urban land now. It's also could be called urbanized. It's an important enough concept, sprawl, that we should recognize it when we see it. A town that you're driving through has some measure of sprawl if you see this landscape. Several lane highway. Okay, it's at least 4 lanes with some kind of turning lane in the middle. And you have, this is what I call strip development. You have a strip of commerce, commercial establishments. When you shop along commercial strips like this, you don't just park your car once and walk to all the establishments. You go into this place and then you pull out and you go into the next place and you pull out. It's car dependent. You have to have that car. You cannot move around on foot. This is not user friendly for a pedestrian. It would be obnoxious and unsafe for a pedestrian or a bicyclist to travel on this. This is strip development. It is dependent on cars. Stores in a sprawling development, in a sprawling pattern of land use are located along a strip of highway. Or like this. This is not sprawl. I just wanted to show the opposite for a second. It's actually a town of Cold Spring, New York. It's right on the Hudson River. And it's a lot of commercial establishments right along the main street. Now, there's not much off of the main street. In fact, if you turn off of Main Street, you'll go down shaded lanes with homes. And a lot of old towns are like that. You have the main street is where all the commercial activity is, and the city hall and that kind of thing. And there's even a high school at one end of Main Street or just off of Main Street. But basically, you have a concentrated area of downtown. Sometimes that's called a walkable downtown. That is centralized. Sprawl is decentralized. So this is centralized too. Guilford, Connecticut. A lot of you come from towns in Connecticut where there is a part of it that's centralized, where there is a walkable downtown that's hanging on, but a lot of the stores have left downtown and a lot of downtowns have totally disappeared because of competition from the strip. All right, let's get back to sprawling development. Big box stores are a feature of sprawling development. Big box store, a store with a lot of square feet. And don't get me wrong, I'm also not telling you where to shop. I need my time in Home Depot and various of these establishments, but just acres and acres of parking lots and separate from everything else. You need a car to go to a big box store. This is a typical sprawling land use pattern of transportation. Strip development in West Hartford. You can see where I got these Google pictures. And then I thought I would just jump around the country and see where I could find strip development. And sure enough, in just about every town, really in the United States, I would say every town in the United States has a sprawling landscape, at least for part of it. It's commonplace. Sprawl is more common than not in the United States. This is in New York State in Dutchess County, just north of Putnam County, a little bit north of Danbury and over the border in New York. Holy cow, look, 1, 2, 3. So it's a 6-lane highway with a turning lane in addition. That's a lot of impervious surface. This is Pennsylvania. Okay, I think this looks less obnoxious than that because it's a narrower street. This is only 3 lanes. And there is a sidewalk here. If you want to make a place walkable or even just more pleasant looking, you have to narrow the road. You can't have big wide roads if you want a place that has any appeal to it. And what I'm saying is these sprawling landscapes, we'll look in just a minute on how they damage the environment, but aesthetically and in terms of what geographers call a sense of place, of being a place that people are attracted to, these offer very little, but the narrower the road, the better it is in terms of the quality of the sense of place. Not that you'd say, hey, let's go to that place in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, where the KFC is. That's such an attractive part of town. You're not saying that about this scene. None of these photos are places where you say, oh, let me show you my hometown. Here it is. You're not showing this off. Wait, look at how many lanes. I cannot get over this. One, two, a sprawling pattern of commercial development. This is strip development. I wanted the aerial view of this. This is just outside Atlanta, by the way. This is Woodstock, Georgia. There's a Sam's Club. Look at all the parking lot space in this photo. And there's your residential area, little condos. But meanwhile, those condos are not walkable to anything. You have to get in your car, you go out. All right, sprawling development. This is in Arizona. And you might say, okay, oh, that looks interesting. Yes, there are palm trees. But at the end of the day, it's not really different than any place else. Los Angeles, I promise I won't overdo this. I could go to every state. And again, it looks a little bit of exotic greenery there. All right, we're back to Hartford. You couldn't tell because they all look the same. This is West Hartford, actually. And all of these landscapes are what the author, James Kunstler, rails at in his book called The Geography of Nowhere. He said, look, all of our downtowns have turned into places, look at all these slides that we've just been through, that look no different than one another, no matter where you are. He said there's no there. So he wrote this book in the 1990s called The Geography of Nowhere. It is a giant rant against suburbanization and sprawl, quite frankly. I just have a few quotes of his to lift over some of these pictures. He says, I like to call it the national automobile slum. You can call it a suburban sprawl. I think it's appropriate to call it the greatest misallocation of resources in the history of the world. That's actually from a TED talk he gave. He's talking about sprawl. He says the two elements of suburban pattern that cause the greatest problems, the extreme separation of uses and the vast distances between things. He says that's not good if you want to point to a place and say, that's a place I want to be. I want to hang out there. No one's saying, let's go here on our vacation. He points out that the car is the way you access the outside world in a sprawling town. But take a look what he says about being in the car. The car doesn't really connect you to the outside world. It may connect you from point A to point B, but the real experience you're having is with the other inhabitants in the car. You're not really experiencing the outside world between point A and point B. And he goes further, the outside world is only an element for moving through as submarines move through the water. If that observation is true, people in suburban sprawl areas don't really experience their environment. Why should they care about trees and ecosystems? As long as they can get from their house to the mall, to the store, to the places they need to get what they need for their lives in their houses, they don't have an experience of place the way you would if you move through that place on foot or on bicycle. He talks about people coming home in the army, and he said, while they're off fighting on our behalf, we should be making the United States, making our towns the best they can be. And this is not the best they can be, is what he says. Okay, last one. He says, community is not something you have like a pizza, nor is it something you can buy. It's a living organism based on a web of interdependencies, which is to say a local economy. Community has a physical expression as buildings related to one another and to whatever public spaces exist, be it the street or the courthouse or the village green. So community has a physical side to it. It's not just an emotional side, but the physical can foster the emotional sense of connectedness. All right, let's get down to the environmental harms. All these sprawling places have a lot of impervious surface, and they require you to use your vehicle a lot. They increase the vehicle miles traveled. Both of those things have an implication for water and air pollution. So let's start with vehicle miles traveled. The definition kind of wordy, but all it means is the number of vehicles on the road in a day. I'll often abbreviate as VMT. Don't let that throw you. Do you ever see those tripwires on the road and you know someone's counting the vehicles? That's how you count the number of vehicles that pass a certain way. A high VMT means a lot of vehicles have used a given road or a given stretch of road in a given day. Now, you can do the vehicle miles traveled for the whole country. The thing I wanted you simply to notice is that it keeps going up and up because we're not sprawling any less. If anything, we're sprawling more. And then it is an interesting phenomenon of what happened last year with everyone quarantining and as many people as possible just not leaving their homes when they didn't have to. Look at the vehicle miles traveled dropping off for the United States. So there are agencies, the US Department of Transportation for one, who compute the vehicle miles traveled for the whole country. The state of Connecticut also computes vehicle mile travels, and they do it by region. I don't even know why this is so, why there would be more travel on the roads here than down here. That'd be something I wish I could ask you all to give me your input on that. Maybe someone can send me an email when you see this video. All right, for every one of those miles that those vehicles are traveling, whether it's a bus or a truck or a private vehicle, a car, there's exhaust associated with that. Now, we only tend to see the exhaust in the cold weather, but it's coming out of your car either way. And if you look at the source of greenhouse gas emissions for the state of Connecticut, this biggest wedge in the pie of greenhouse gas emissions for Connecticut is transportation. Now, that combines buses and other things too, but most of these are cars. And one of the reasons this wedge is so big for Connecticut is because Connecticut has a lot of sprawl, or we require you to use your car for almost everything. Let's go to impervious surfaces now. To accommodate those vehicles, we pave everything. Sprawling development puts cars at the center of community design, and to accommodate cars, extensive impervious surface is put down. That increases runoff, that's stormwater runoff, and runoff in sprawling places is loaded with toxic substances that damage water quality and wildlife. Impervious surfaces also reduce recharge. Think of this, think of the diagram where we see the water seeping down into the ground. Remember percolating? Well, it can't percolate if you have the surface of the land paved over. You reduce groundwater reserves because the water isn't going into the ground, it's running off the surface. And that becomes crucial during droughts, especially. This diagram, it was made in the late 90s by a guy named Schuler, who worked for the Center for Watershed Protection, but it is a classic that's always used to this day to gauge how damaging the amount of impervious surface in a town is. Let's interpret this. If I was in class, I would call on someone and ask them, tell me one thing you know is true just by looking at this chart. If I was a student being asked to think about this, I would look at the labels for the axes. So these numbers refer to percent impervious surface. So a place with 50% coverage of pavement is what this 50 refers to. And then stream impact, meaning environmentalists say the word impact, they mean the environment is showing signs of degradation, okay? So low signs of impact, if you have 10% of your town is paved, if it's 10% or lower, the streams are probably in good shape. If it's anywhere from 10% up to 25%, that looks like your streams will be moderately impacted. So they're showing some signs of strain, and that could be the wildlife there is not as plentiful, or they could have intersex qualities. That depends on the particular study and particular stream. This number is crucial. Beyond 25% impervious surface, your streams in your community are severely impacted. So that's what this diagram means. One of the reasons impervious surface and urbanization is a problem then is that impervious surface makes the streams impacted. Well, let's look at that percentage, that 25% impervious surface from another perspective. If there's no urbanization at all in an area, that's what this little photo represents. You would have, even in an area where there's no pavement at all, you tend to have 10% runoff, according to this diagram, which is also widely used. And if there's no development there, get this, 40% of the rain that falls and snow evaporates. That leaves 50% of the water to seep into the ground. Half of that 50% stays in the upper surface of the soil and becomes moisture to serve these plants and whatever organisms are down there. Then the other half of the water that seeps in goes deeper down and goes into the groundwater table and can become well water or whatever you use your groundwater for. With a little bit of development, that is 10 to 20% impervious surface, look at the changes in percentages. Now, 20% runs off the surface. Before it was 10, but once you even do a little bit of development, 20% runs off. Not quite 40 evaporates. That's interesting. The area has become slightly drier than in the air. Less is infiltrating. It doesn't seem drastic just looking at these numbers. Let's look at the next scenario. 35 to 50% impervious surface, and now 30% of the water's running off. And it's going to make its way to a water body, but it's going off the surface, which means it's going to pick up contaminants as it goes across the surface. And those contaminants are what worry us. It's also going to be warmer water. Water that runs off the surface is always artificially warmed. Warm water going into a stream always degrades that stream quality. Notice how much less is evapotranspiring, which means you have less moisture in the air, less chance of rainfall. Places that are already dry cannot afford to lose this kind of moisture. Only 15% of the rain that falls from the sky is getting into the groundwater now with this level of impervious surface, and 20% is staying in the shallow level of the soil. Okay, take a look at this. Cities are 75 to 100% impervious surface. And you would think, oh, that's horrible. No, as an environmentalist, I love cities because a well-designed city I like, and there are such things as sustainable cities. When you make things compacted like this, when you can figure out a way to help people live close together and have their stores be not far from them and have places that are walkable and bikeable, you do have to have a lot of impervious surface. But when you do this, you can leave open space around the city. That's why I like cities. But just looking at this square, you would say, oh, cities are horrible. They're horrible for water quality. Well, right now, cities are doing a lot to trap their water before it goes down and before it runs off. Those buildings now with green roofs, this is not a sustainable city. Just think of what Majora Carter was working on. She had in a job training program where people were learning to install green roofs. Green roofs absorb a lot of the water that would become runoff. You have a lot of things going on in a city that can limit this and alter this picture. But normally, impervious surface is very, very bad for water quality.